Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 11th chapter in the book of Daniel. Herein we read of prophecy which was more immediately fulfilled than some of the long vision prophecies of Daniel, such as, for instance, in the 9th chapter, we read of his famous weeks chart, which determine with geographical precision the arrival of the Messiah. And there is a certain school of thought which posits that Daniel was written in the 2nd century before Messiah, BM, and according to tradition, it was written in the 500s. Daniel would have wrote the 10th through 12th chapters when he was 83 years old. And but regardless of that, the accuracy of the 90 weeks chapter, the theory behind the 200-year dating is that no man could have predicted all this that transpired without the gift of foreknowledge, so they're almost denying that he had hindsight. But even if he did write it in 200, and I personally believe he wrote it in the 500s, that would not diminish his prophetic claims to the Messiah in the terms of his weeks that we read, and it just makes it all the more likely that he would predict the more immediate future of the Grecian struggle for control of Palestine, which takes place after the Persians' control. So we find him in service of Darius, the original Persian Empire, and in this previous chapter we read of an invisible element of the spiritual warfare. We are introduced to Michael, who personally wages war on his behalf against the 21 demons of Persia and is the source of this revelation. And Michael is one of the two angels mentioned by name. The other is Gabriel, but Michael is the greater of these, as he is identified as the archangel, meaning the supreme one. Yet, so through his power is Daniel able to predict the events which come to pass. And we're going to make it all the way up till the 20th verse, because after that we read of Antiochus IV, who does more than try to control the Jews. He tries to absolutely desecrate him. Now the kings and the power struggle which exists prior to them, there's a lot of history in it and concerns more the struggle for control over the land. But Antiochus IV is sort of a notorious figure who fulfills the abomination of Daniel, as alluded to in 9:27. So the opening verse reads, "And in the first year of Darius the Medite, I myself stood up to support and protect him." Darius was not to be confused with the third Persian emperor, but he was believed to be the name of the governor who governed the region of Babylon in Cyrus's new empire. And he was a Medite. So the Medo-Persian Empire combined two primary ethnic elements, the Medos and the Persians. They both hailed from the modern country of Iran. "And now I declare the truth to you. See, 3 more kings are to arise in Persia, and the 4th is to become far richer than them all. And by his power, through his riches, he stirs up all against the rulership of Javan." Javan is the Hebrew term which translates as Greek. They would have referred to themselves as Hellenistic. They would have been referred to by the Romans as Achaeans, and we know them more modernly as the Greeks. But before they reign supreme on the known earth, their imperial predecessors is the Persians, and right now they're in their founding days by Cyrus. So the 3 kings which come after him can be dated to Cambyses, his son. He conquered Egypt, among other things. He reigned from 530 to 522 BM. And then a usurper by the name of Gautama ruled briefly from 522, but he's expelled by Darius I, who has a legitimate claim and is related by blood to Cyrus. And Cambyses, somehow, he reigned from 521 to 586, and he launched the original invasion against the Greeks across the other side of the Aegean. So by Cyrus's time, the Greeks, they had a presence, in a colonial presence in the western extremity of the modern country of Turkey, and Cyrus had brought them all under his control, thus provoking the eventual and inevitable crash between themselves and the Greeks. The forces sent under Darius I are repelled, but after him comes his son Xerxes, who reigns from 486 to 465 BM, and his wealth was famous and legendary. He unleashed an army of some 1,700,000 people against Greece, but in spite of that, the Greeks overcame the odds and obstacles, protected themselves and by connection Western civilization, and they would impose Western civilization in an eastward direction through conquest, and with the passage of time, when they were conquered by Rome, their culture would be preserved and passed on all the way up to us. And a mighty king shall arise, and he shall rule with great authority, and do as he pleases. This is in reference to Alexander the Great. He is the son of the king who united the Grecian tribes from Macedon, the country to the north of Greece. Greece, throughout her history, was a conglomeration of city-states which each had valued their independence, and so there was no consolidated control over the land until the king to the north, Philip, conquered them, and he is assassinated, leaving his 20-year-old son to bring his campaign against the Persian Empire, and he's going to conquer everything in sight, everywhere his foot marches. Over the course of 10 years, he swallows whole, and there was really no conqueror quite like him in human history. And but when he has arisen, his rule shall be broken up and divided towards the four winds of the heavens, but not among his descendants, nor according to his authority with which he ruled, because his rule shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. So he died in 323 BM of sickness, believed to be contracted malaria or something of that sort, from India, which is where he took his imperial thrust all the way to. And but when he dies, he's going to die without a designated successor, because his primary wife, was a Persian woman, which he adapted at the consternation of his Macedonian nobles, and this was to symbolize the building of bridges between Greek and Oriental, that none of his he was seemingly on a one-man crusade to do this. All of his nobles resisted and rejected, and he did have an elder half-brother, Philip, who was developmentally disabled, and he did have a 13-year-old son through Roxana, who was murdered by the ambitious Antipater, who seizes control, or his father does, of the Achaean land, which is one of the four divisions. So the kingdoms, the wars, the post-Alexandrian wars would wage for the next 40 years, but by 301 there were four distinct emergent kingdoms which had been carved up from the united land that he conquered. And we're going to read about the interchange of two of these, the king of the north, which is the Seleucids. They reigned over much of the Asian portion of what the former Persian Empire, and the king of the south, who are the Ptolemies, the descendants of the general who wrested control over Egypt. And a king of the south shall become strong, along with one of his princes, who gains power over him, and shall rule, his rule being a great rule. This king of the south is Ptolemy I Soter, who reigned from 323 to 285 BM. He was a general and an advisor and a friend of Alexander the Great. He was among the ones who was raised with him from his youth in Macedonia, and he seizes control over the land of Egypt, and his empire. His descendants maintained control over Palestine and Judea until 198 BM, and the king of the north will be Seleucus I Nicator, who reigned from 321 to 281 BM, and he was in this they were the dominant, for all intents and purposes, powers in the post-Alexandrian carve-up, Syria or Persia and Egypt. And these countries, territories collided over what intersects with where the Roman Palestine of originally Greek province of Palestine. It was renamed by the Romans to Palestine. I'm not quite sure what the Greeks called it, but their territory would have been at the crossroads of this power clash of these two empires of similar origins who coexisted side by side, more often warring than being formed in alliances. And at the end of the years they shall join themselves together, and a daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she shall not retain the strength of her power, nor would he or his power stand, and she shall be given up with those who brought her, and he who brought her forth, and he who supported her in those days. Now the king of the north is Antiochus Theos, which is the Greek term for divinity. Theos, he reigned from 261 to 246 BM, and the person he married was Bernice Syra, the daughter of Ptolemy II Philopator, who reigned from 284 to 246 BM. And this wedding would take place in the year 250 BM, but by 246 he had lost interest in her. He had in effect discarded, if not divorced her. In any case, she had no influence or standing, and this marriage was the traditional foundation and formation for alliances between ancient monarchies. They would signal their unity through the marriage of their offspring, and this this alliance didn't last because the marriage didn't. But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, and he shall come into the defense, and come into a stronghold of the king of the north, and shall act against them, and shall prevail. This is Bernice's brother Ptolemy the third, surnamed Eugrades, who reigned from 246 to 221 BM. He would defeat Seleucus II, surnamed Callimachus, who reigned from 246 to 226. He's the king of the north of this time, and the defeat would occur. The defeat would result in the transfer of Antioch in Syria and Seleucia to his at least temporary control. And also their mighty ones, with their princes and their precious utensils of silver and gold, he shall seize and bring to Egypt, and he shall stand more years than the king of the north. So his reign is providentially predetermined to be lengthier than that of the king of the north. He's going to carry booty with him from his successful military ventures. He's going to take all their idols, all their religious instruments of monetary value. He's going to seize control of them and bring them into his land as an act of plunder, so his kingdom will be enriched by the king he did not quite conquer but defeated in military battle. Then he shall enter the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So Seleucus II, he was originally defeated, and he tries to invade Egypt in 242, but is defeated in the course thereof. So he returns to his own land to having failed in what he set out to do. But his sons shall stir themselves up and assemble a great army, and he shall certainly come and overflow and pass through, then return to his stronghold and be stirred up. This son and successor was Seleucus III, surnamed Cyrenius, who reigned from 226 to 223 BM, and this other son there's two sons mentioned, and the other one is Antiochus the third, known as the Great, who reigned from 223 to 187 BM. So we realize that the length of his reign is dramatically longer than his southern counterpart. Then the king of the south shall be enraged and go out to fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall raise a large army, but the army shall be given into the hand of the enemy. So the king of Egypt will be provoked into wrath and retaliation by this, and will go out to fight with the king of Seleucia or Persia or Syria, who's going to raise a large army in response, both of them, but the army will be given into the hands of his enemies. So in other words, Egypt is defeated and the tides turn in the favor of the Seleucids. And all of the 13 Ptolemies, the Ptolemaic dynasty ultimately outlasted the Seleucids. They lasted all the way until 30 BM. 13 Ptolemies ruled until Cleopatra, we're going to meet the original one soon, was defeated and deposed, allied with Mark Antony, who was defeated and deposed by Octavian Caesar, the original Roman emperor. And the Seleucids would have been swallowed whole sometime. We read of their defeats at the hand of the Romans eventually, but there was a resurgence of Persian native nationalism, and what was once the Medo-Persians was now known as the Parthian Empire, and they would be Rome's only real imperial competition. And he shall capture the army, his heart being exalted, and he shall call tens of thousands to fall, but not prevail. So Antiochus the Great was defeated by Ptolemy IV, surnamed Philopator, at Ripha in Egypt in 217, thus maintaining Egyptian control of Palestine for at least until 198. In the next verse we read of the event. In the verse after that, we read of an event immediately before the event, which results in the transfer of control of Palestine and Judea from Egyptian to Syrian or Seleucid hands. So in the 13th verse, we read, "And the king of the north shall return and raise an army greater than the former, and certainly come at the great end of some years, with a great army and much supplies." So the king of north is busy conquering and subduing these territories all around him, not necessarily to the south, but its ultimate aim and orientation is to gather the forces to overwhelm militarily the king of the south. And the northern kingdom was the largest territorially, but the south was the most powerful kingdom in measure of riches and cultural influences. And there was a vibrant community of Alexandrian Jews. Then this occurred in the year 198, and then in the next verse we read, "And in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south, while some violent ones among your people exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall stumble." Remember, he's addressing Cyrus, or a Persian audience, about what is to come after his empire passes off the scene. He's describing the dynamics of the empire which replaces them. And so he's saying that some of his Persian people are going to be aligned with a faction of rebels, and but it's going to be quashed by this takes place during the reign of Ptolemy V, surnamed Epiphanes, who reigned from 203 to 181 BM, and it's going to be suppressed by his general Scorpio in the year 200. So this is slightly before the event which ultimately culminates in the transfer of control from Egyptian to Syrian or Seleucid hands. And then the 15th verse reads, "Then the king of the north shall come in and build a siege mound, and capture a city of strongholds, and the arms of the south shall not stand, nor his choice people, for there is no strength to stand." So the king of the north is, I think, Antiochus III still at this time, and he was less successful, or actually we're going to get to that. Said he's not going to have strength, so he's not going to be able to use it or exploit it or in any way make any usefulness out of the strength. Then in the 16th verse we read, "So his but that also means that Scopas was defeated at Sidon by Antiochus III, who gains Palestine in the process of that conquest. So his opponent shall do as he pleases, with no one standing against him, and shall stand in the splendid land, with destruction in his hand. The splendid land is the reference of the Promised Land, the land of milk and honey, which was the Hebrews' heritage by tradition, although they would resettle there during the Persian Empire. But when Greece came and conquered Persia, they came along with them, and even though the Hellenistic they had a benign form of cultural invasion under the Hellenistic Alexandrians, the Egyptians. They didn't tamper with their culture too much. They certainly made it available to them. That's why the thriving community of Jews revolved around Alexandria, but they didn't try to impose their culture on their conquered people, and this was the intent of Antiochus III, but he is flattered by the reception of the rebels who had aligned against the Egyptians, so he relents, and that awaits for the one who is known as Antiochus IV, who, as we read, after the range we covered today, was a usurper without any legitimate claim to the throne. And he shall turn his face to enter with the strength of his entire rule, and make an alliance with him. And he shall do so, and give him the daughter of women to corrupt her. But she shall not stand, neither before him. This is in reference to Cleopatra I, which is the name, or the title is actually Seleucid in origin, yet it would become repeated throughout all the way to Cleopatra, the final queen and pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the final pharaoh of ancient Egypt itself. She's going to be married to Ptolemy V, but she's going to be loyal to the country from whence she hailed, so there's not going to be the element of respectful equity in this alliance, and she's going to send women to corrupt her, but she shall not stand, and she's not going to be for her husband, whom she's theoretically aligned to by marriage. Then he shall turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. So this refers to the Roman general Scipio, who defeated Antiochus III in 191 and 190 BM. This marks the decline, even though the Seleucids had triumphed over their Egyptians, or at least seized some territory from them. They're going to start to crumble on their own ends from the combined forces of Rome and eventually the Parthians, the natives. Verse 19, Then he shall turn his face towards the stronghold of his own land, but shall stumble and fall, and not be found. This unsuccessful, defeated king will be assassinated in 187 BM, while home, having nothing to do, having failed in his conquest. He's going to remain there for a few years, and then he's going to meet his end prematurely via assassination. Then in the 20th and final verse, and in his place one shall stand up, who imposes taxes of the honored king, but within a few days he is destroyed, but not in wrath or battle. This is in reference to Seleucus the fourth, surnamed Philopator, who was his son and successor, who sent a tax collector by the name of Heliodorus in order to invade the temple, to strip it of its material resources in order to pay the tax of the hefty fine or the tribute money that they owed to their superior Roman army, which had defeated them. But he's going to be murdered soon after, and Seleucus IV reigns from 187 to 175 BM, after which we read of a disturbance in the succession of the Seleucid Empire, which is usurped, and that usurper is going to be more tyrannical than any of his predecessors, at least in measured by the disrespect and dishonor that he inflicts on the Jewish people. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned till next time. I'll probably finish up the chapter at a future date. Stay tuned at least until then. See you soon. Bye-bye.